Hi, I'm John F. Allen.
And I'm R.J. Sullivan.
And we're the Two Towers.
Greetings and welcome to the Two Towers Talk Show. I'm your host, Tower 1, John F. Allen.
And I'm Tower 2, R.J. Sullivan.
Today we are going to discuss and review The Mandalorian Season One, the Disney Plus new Star Wars franchise live action series. And before we get started, I would like to take the time to introduce our special guest for this episode. We have asked our friend and writing peer.
One more thing, I'm sorry. I always say Kahler, is that correct?
She so graciously accepted, and I would like to introduce her. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about you?
Thank you, John. My name is Ericka Kahler, and I am a dark fantasy and science fiction writer. I have an Amazon author page, and I also have a personal page at erickakahler.wordpress.com. And the last name is Kahler, not Taylor, which is what like 90% of people think I say when I say my name. So,
all right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to do a little introduction on The Mandalorian. It's
an obscure show, I think, but I think a couple people may have heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, only one or two, three people maybe in the entire universe or galaxy, as it were. But The Mandalorian is an American space western streaming television series that was created by Jon Favreau for Disney Plus. And if you have not been, if you've been living under a rock, you wouldn't know that Disney Plus is the streaming service for Disney, and Disney owns Star Wars. So this show premiered on the service's launch back in November 2019 and is the first live action series in the Star Wars franchise for the streaming service. It won't be the last. Let me just say that they have a lot more series that they've been rumored to have coming down the pipeline. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But this show picks up 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. It stars Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian. So basically, for all of our Star Wars fans out there, this takes place right after the events, 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, which was the last of the original trilogy. And we are looking at the galaxy after the fall of the Empire. The Mandalorian follows a lone bounty hunter in the outer reaches of the galaxy, the outer rim, as it were. He's hired to retrieve the child, which has been affectionately named Baby Yoda. Now, this is not Yoda that we know from the original trilogy and the Clone Wars. This is just a juvenile or baby of his species, but he's affectionately known as Baby Yoda. So if you hear us say Baby Yoda or anyone else, they're talking about this character. He's 50 years old. Even though he's 50 years old, he's still a baby because that species ages very slowly. As you might recall, Master Yoda was like 800, 900 years old when he passed. That's not a spoiler. The movie's been out for
Dang it, John! What's wrong with you?
Anyway, the Mandalorian that we see, and just so you can get a little bit of an idea, the Mandalorian that we are following around is one of a race or a creed of characters from the planet Mandalore. And Jaren is his name. So, you can kind of know that there are other Mandalorians around, but the one that we're going to be talking about in this series is Jaren. And just so you would know, he was originally tasked to bring this child to the Empire. But he has this change of heart, and he goes on a quest to protect the child and get it back to its own kind. And he is pursued by the villain, Moff Gideon, played by Giancarlo Esposito. And I must say, we'll get into the performances later, but got some big talent here. The Mandalorian premiered with an 8-episode first season, and it was met with very positive reviews. Was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series at the 72nd Primetime Emmy Awards and won 7 Primetime Creative Arts Emmy Awards. The second season premiered this year on October 30th, and development work on the third season has begun because it has been green lit for a third season already. Star Wars creator George Lucas began development on a live-action Star Wars television series back in 2009, but the project was deemed too expensive to produce. But then Disney got that buttload of money when they purchased Marvel. Yeah, that was a big return on their investment. Let's just, put that out there. So then they bought Lucasfilm, and then they brought it to Disney in 2012, and then work on the new Star Wars series began there. Jon Favreau signed on in March 2018, serves as the writer and showrunner. He executive produces the series alongside Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, and Colin Wilson. The series title was announced on October 2018 with the start of filming at Manhattan Beach Studios in California. Visual effects company Industrial Light and Magic, that may be familiar to people who are familiar with Star Wars, developed the stagecraft technology for the series using virtual sets and a 360-degree video wall to create the series environments. It's gorgeous. We'll get into that. Oh, I'm excited. I'm sure that you can tell. This has since been adopted by other film and television productions. Now, so before we start talking about the individual episodes of the first season, there is a thing going on in the Star Wars verse, and it has to do with episode 2 of season 2 of the new season of The Mandalorian. And it's the most ridiculous thing that I've heard come out of the followers of this show or Star Wars in general. So this is a spoiler. If you haven't seen episode 2, season 2, then, shut your ears, fast forward, whatever. Anyway, Baby Yoda, the child, was with the Mandalorian when he was transporting an amphibian species, a female of an amphibian species, and her unfertilized eggs to another planet where she could meet up with her husband, another amphibian, and they could fertilize the eggs and spawn their offspring. If you're familiar with this show, maybe you aren't, but most people are. Baby Yoda eats everything and anything. He's a baby, so they're always constantly putting stuff in their mouth, trying to eat it. That's just, if you've ever had a kid, that's par for the course. So Baby Yoda ate some of the unfertilized eggs of the amphibian female, and the internet went off. Now they want to cancel Baby Yoda. This is the most asinine and ridiculous thing that I've ever encountered with regards to the Star Wars universe. And I think that these people don't have anything else better to do in their lives but to try and cancel Baby Yoda, a fictional character in a fictional setting, eating fictional eggs from a fictional species. Do you see how asinine this is? But I will give the other people here a chance to chime in. What do you guys think?
I've got 3 kids, and I think what I find kind of funny about this is how some people that I've seen actually on my wall say that Yoda is somehow evil for these actions. And you know, kids are kids. I don't think they think about consequences, or they don't necessarily consider all the implications of what it is that they want to do. They want what they want when they want it. And I think, you know, the way I took it, Baby Yoda thought the eggs were delicious and he just wanted more. And I don't think there was any connection as to exactly what the eggs were or what they meant to the client per se. And I have had many conversations with my very small children when they were very small, where I have said, don't do that. And they've looked right at me and they've done it. And it's almost kind of a game to them. So to me, attaching evil intent to the action, I think, is where it's a big eye roll for me. I just don't think that I didn't see anything that made me believe that Baby Yoda understood the implications of its actions. It just knew the eggs were good and it wanted more of them. And that's probably about as far as the child thought about it. So that's where I came from it. I was perfectly fine with it. I thought it was hysterical. And this stuff is just kind of silly, and it's kind of an eye roll, but it gets people talking. So I guess it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Well, I'll say for me that, first of all, I think some of the outrage is predicated on a misunderstanding of something that was said in the dialogue, where she talks about facing the extinction of her family line. So I've seen a lot of articles calling it genocide, which, first of all, Baby Yoda not understanding the consequences of its actions at all, because it is a toddler and toddlers just don't think like that. And second of all, it's not saying that their entire species is going to go extinct if these eggs are all eaten, merely that they're the last of their line. These eggs are her last hope. And the stakes were not as high as some people made them out to be, I think. And second of all, I actually thought that it was incredible character development for our main character, Jaren there, because this is him really taking on that aspect of fatherhood for the first time. And as RJ pointed out, one of the aspects of fatherhood is your kids do things you don't want them to do. And they do things without regard for the consequences of what they're doing.
Yeah, and we've seen the Mandalorian kind of give in to the I'm going to use the expression, Baby Yoda's wants of the moment. There's the running gag with the joystick where he keeps taking a little piece off and giving it to Baby Yoda because he's tired of having that fight. And I think, to your point, this was his wake-up call that you can't always let the baby have its way, and sometimes that can be truly devastating for his client and for himself if he allows that to happen all the time. I do think it was much more of a character moment for the Mandalorian than for Baby Yoda. It spoke to the idea of he's been kind of not taking his responsibilities very seriously, and now he needs to. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
Although I will tell you, the one most unrealistic thing about the entire series I find is how easy it is for him to find a babysitter. He's constantly...
Yeah, that is kind of like, a convenience thing with the show. I wanted to also say that to the people who think this is genocide and think that this is just so horrible and evil, you'd better be only eating vegetables. Because if you eat caviar or you eat chicken eggs for breakfast, then you're as culpable as the baby is. As a matter of fact, you're worse because you are a sentient adult or old enough being that you know what you're doing, as opposed to a child. So before you start doing, getting on your high horse and trying to be so holier than thou, maybe you should take a look in the mirror and get a life. Yes, I said it. Get a life. This is ridiculous. It's beyond asinine. And I think that the people who want to bring this franchise down or criticize it to this point, really, you're not really Star Wars fans. You're just somebody that likes to argue about asinine stuff and try and seem relevant, but you're not really. Anyway, the producers for the show have come out and they have explained everything, and I stand in support of their decision. I think that the episode was just fine. So get over yourselves.
Wow, we addressed the big controversies on this show.
Right. So let's go into season 1, episode 1. Again, our bounty hunter, the Mandalorian, the title character is Din Djarin, and he is a member of the Mandalorians. And the Mandalorians are a group of warriors who have a specific code and a moral character in how they do things and how they fight and how they interact with people and so forth and so on. Anyone familiar with Star Wars has heard of Boba Fett. He is a Mandalorian, and he was thought to be lost in the Return of the Jedi, and he was not seen or heard from for a while. But let's just say he's going to be making a comeback. And it's been all over the news, so that's not really a spoiler either. But the series starts out with the client, and that's the actual person who hires Djarin to get the child. And the first season features several recurring co-stars. One in Grief Karga, who is the leader of the Bounty Hunter Guild, which Djarin belongs to, and that's portrayed by Carl Weathers. And yes, anybody who hasn't been living under a rock knows who Carl Weathers is. And
you mean Commander Carl, right?
Predator. Action Jackson. I'm sorry. This goes on. And if you are an NFL fan, he was also an NFL player back in the 70s, if you're old enough to remember that. But anyway, so you've got the client played by Werner Herzog. And if you don't know, he's a known actor. He's been in several things. Nosferatu the Vampire in 1979, Cave of Forgotten Dreams. He's a German actor, so look him up. Anyway, he is the client who has hired the Djarin to get the child. And so he has to armor up, and he accepts the terms. And the terms for this particular endeavor is that he's going to be paid with Beskar. And that is the metal, which is almost like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, vibranium or adamantium, which is very impenetrable metal that the Mandalorians use to make their armor. And as they progress in their lives as warriors, the more of the Beskar that they can get to make the different pieces of their armor, the stronger they are when they're fighting, because the other weapons aren't able to penetrate it. So it's very valuable. So anyway, the client promises to reward Djarin with a crate of the Beskar, and he receives a single bar as a down payment, and then he travels to the desert planet, the and he meets a native there who wants to be rid of the criminals and mercenaries who were there. He teaches, and this is, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of this character, but he is computer generated, but he is voiced by Nick Nolte. And if you don't know who Nick Nolte is, then look that up too. But anyway, he teaches Jaren how to ride a blur, which is a large creature that they use to get around on. They ride these creatures, and he ends up encountering a bounty droid that is there trying to locate the child. And the bounty droid is set to kill the child. And, you know, Jaren doesn't have really a stake in this fight other than getting paid and bringing this child back or whatnot. And so he has to make a decision. He makes this decision to take out the droid and protect the child. This is the turning point, I think, in the arc of the character. He's went from someone who's doing something specifically for money or payment. He keeps his emotions and thoughts and feelings out of it. It's business. But this changed when he encountered the child. And I think that even throughout the course of the first episode, I immediately I was cheering for Jaren. His character, I don't know if it's Pedro Pascal's voice. I don't know if it was the mannerisms, but I immediately was rooting for this character, and he was like the best Star Wars character I'd seen in 30 years. I mean, that's just how I felt about him, even before we got to see the child, who I fell in love with. But Jaren is a very charismatic character for me, and I was immediately drawn to him. What did you guys think about that first episode?
I'm going to take it next because, first of all, I wanted to take a moment to welcome Ericka to the show. I have to say that Ericka is one of the biggest Star Wars fans that I've ever met, specifically a Princess Leia fan. I'll let her talk a little bit about that before we get too much more into this, but that was specifically why John and I wanted to have her on this program to talk about this particular series. Ericka, what, just real brief, let's take a quick detour. What has Star Wars meant to you in your life?
Well, I first saw Star Wars when I was very, very young, and I grew up in a family where there was a lot of abuse going on. There was a lot of shades of gray in life. And one of the things that first attracted me to Star Wars is I knew who the good guys and bad guys were.
Sure, absolutely. Like,
straight up, it was easy to tell who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. It's not until you get much older that you start getting into those gradations there. And Princess Leia, I mean, there she was. She was smart. She was ready to stand up for herself. And I've often contended that the Star Wars movies really should have been called Princess Leia and those two guys that follow her around.
And I've heard the arguments, and they're compelling. We should have a show about that sometime. But so
she's really, to me, the heart and core of those original trilogy movies, because it's her crusade.
Absolutely. I think there's a strong argument to be made there. So coming back to my thoughts on this episode, to me, it's interesting that the resources we were looking at described this as a space Western, because it does seem to push so hard into a lot of those tropes, and we'll get further into that. But we start right off with a bounty hunter who we show that he has his bounty, and this guy cannot talk the Mandalorian out of claiming his bounty no matter what. It's a pretty funny opening couple scenes where he goes and gets the guy out of a bar and brings him in, and the guy thinks he's going to bribe him. He thinks he's going to try all these different methods to try to get out of the situation, and the guy, Mandalorian just cold-blooded freezes him and brings him in and collects the bounty. It kind of sets the tone to establish what happens later when he goes and meets up with Baby Yoda, so that we can appreciate the change and the fact that he doesn't do what his calling tells him he should do, what his code tells him he should do. Another thing I really liked in this very first episode is we have names from the Star Wars universe. The Mandalorian, we knew Boba Fett was a Mandalorian, but we really didn't know what that meant, besides the fact that he was a bounty hunter and he was a Mandalorian, and that those were just names. Those were trivia names that, Star Wars fans could recite, but you didn't have a lot of depth into them. And also the IG-88, I believe, was the action figure you could pick up from the original trilogy. We knew what an IG robot looked like. We knew it was another bounty hunter that was there with Boba Fett, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, we knew nothing about them. And I love the fact that as part of the story, they dug deeper into these things that we understood to be established Star Wars lore, and gave you so much more. Right off in the first episode, we learned so much more about what the Mandalorians are, what their code is like, how their system works. The fact that just the fact that it built so much more onto, what started off with Boba Fett was just he's a bounty hunter, he's got a cool armor, he's got a rocket pack, and now we know so much more about how that armor gets made. And to John's point, acting through a suit of armor in an entire series is an incredibly unique challenge that the actor pulls off absolutely. I don't know how you make someone so charismatic when you're acting behind basically a suit of armor, but he absolutely manages to pull it off. So those are my impressions with Chapter 1. And Ericka, we'll turn it over to you.
I thought Chapter 1 was an incredible world-building experience. All of the things that you're talking about, these little touches that are in some ways fan service, but they're also helping very much to establish the world that he lives in. Plus, for me, in this first episode, his character arc is sort of paralleling what we see with Han Solo when we get to that first movie. He's at a low point in his life. He doesn't have a lot of connections to other people. They establish early on that he was an orphan who was taken in by the Mandalorians. And so part of what you're seeing here is him going above and beyond that rugged independence, that I don't need anybody and anything, to start to make those connections with other people. And with those connections come the complications. And so I thought that it was nice that they were following those Western tropes, because it gave them time to sort of build that slowly, which I think really contributed to everybody feeling so much for this character. They're not trying to rush us through it.
Yes, and I think you make a good point with regards to the introduction, and I think RJ touched upon how this is a good introduction to this character, and we didn't really know a lot about the Mandalorians from the original trilogy. There were two animated shows that are worth watching for viewers, and I'll just, if you haven't already watched them, put them out there, but that's Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. And this will give you a little bit more insight into certain things that go on outside of the original trilogy, and then of course the films, the Clone Wars, Attack of the Clones trilogy, and then of course the Rise of Skywalker trilogy. But one of the things that I wanted to touch upon before we go to episode 2 is the fact that this show is set in the Star Wars universe galaxy, and it doesn't have to reference Luke, Leia, Han, or even Vader very much at all. It is able to stand out on its own, but yet give you the feel of what Star Wars was when it first hit the screens with A New Hope back in 1977. It was that sense of adventure and that awe-inspiring special effects and the characters and the character developments that you saw in the original trilogy is in this show. And it doesn't necessarily have to relate back to those characters very directly. There are some subtle references and Easter eggs to the original trilogy, to be sure. And as the series progressed, they become less subtle, but nevertheless, it's not where this has to have some kind of tie to the original trilogy to be relevant. It stands on its own. And I think that's one of the things that really, really excited me. It's almost like they're rebooting the Star Wars franchise in a way that is giving it its own little self-contained bubble pocket series within that universe. And that I think they really do an excellent job in that, and I can't commend them enough with regards to that. So episode 2, chapter 2 is called The Child. So now Jaren has the child in his possession, and he's taking him back to his employer. Now, this is where we get to see another crossroads for Jaren. He has he finds that a team of Jawas are scavenging his ship for parts, and just so we can be clear on that, his ship is called the Razor Crest. You'll hear about that several times throughout the series. And it's a small ship, smaller than the Millennium Falcon, but it's a character in and of itself. And after a short battle, he retreats to Sandcrawler. They stun him unconscious, Jaren. He returns to his ship, finding it stripped bare and all the weaponry was stolen. With the assistance of the Nick Nolte character, he begrudgingly bargains with the Jawas to return his ship's part in return for retrieving the egg of a mudhorn, a large horned beast. Now, Star Wars would not be Star Wars if you did not have these alien creatures that are like wild animals that the characters have to confront. You saw it in the original trilogy. That's just a part of the mythos, and it's part of the Star Wars lore. Jaren locates and gets thrown around and battered by one of the mudhorns in its den. As the beast charges to finish him off, his weapons are failing, his armor is heavily damaged. The child uses the Force to lift it, allowing him to come in for the kill. He returns the egg to the Jawas. They cut it open and eat its contents. Oh, wait, that's genocide. I'm sorry. Anyway, he and the Nick Nolte character repair the ship. And he's offered to join the crew, but the Nick Nolte character declines, and you can see them parting as friends. And then the Mandalorian takes to the space with the child, and the child at this point had used all of his energy to save Jaren, and that is where you're going to see the first instance of the bond between them. The child realizes that Jaren is its protector and looks at it as a father figure and uses its abilities to protect, to return the favor in protecting Jaren when he was in mortal danger. This episode was full of action. It was real character development from Jaren to the child, to the Nick Nolte character. All of these things, all these elements come to bear in this episode. And while some people may want to say, well, it's just a little side episode or whatnot, I think that I don't really see this series as having quote unquote side episodes. I think there are ones that don't directly drive the overarching plot, but they all serve a purpose to at the very least, subtly move the characters from point A to point B and add a little bit more depth and character development to them to get to the next episode. And some are more entrenched in the overarching plot, and some aren't. Some are just like adventures along the way, but all of them have some type of significance, in my opinion. What do you guys think about episode or chapter 2, The Child?
Okay, so yeah, chapter 2 picks up exactly where chapter 1 ends, and we continue the story where you gotta really appreciate just what assholes the Jawas are. I mean, oh my God. I mean, what does it take to steal something from someone and then barter to get it back? I mean, there's a certain level of chutzpah there that you have to salute that,
He abandoned it, according to them.
Yeah, right. According to them.
Makes it fair salvage.
It's like, oh, you mean this thing that was yours until we took it? Yeah, we'll let you have it back, but you got to do us a favor first. It's just like, wow. I mean, you always knew they were not the most reputable of creatures, but I really appreciated like getting this second look to kind of confirm what you already knew. And this is the first time we saw Baby Yoda and the potential there, and we saw that this is not a simple harmless baby. I mean, there's an element of danger there, and I love the way it's set up to just right. You get the idea that Baby Yoda has reciprocated the loyalty to our character. And then I really appreciate Nick Nolte's voice work. The credit says Nick Nolte, and I sit there and I listen and I'm like, wow, I didn't even know he could do voice work. It doesn't necessarily sound like him, but it is such a really good performance. So yeah, there's a lot to love here in chapter 2. Ericka?
I have spoken.
I have spoken.
Spoken. Yes. I don't think that this was out of the main line at all. In fact, I think, to me, it feels a lot like a role-playing game where you have this big overall objective, but each episode is the next thing you have to do to get closer to that big overall objective. And so this is really the running away sequence for me. And he's just trying to keep going and to survive long enough to deal with the actual consequences of this thing that he's done, which is taking the child. And I absolutely loved the Ugnaught character. And I loved the depth that they kind of gave us to that. That he was an Imperial bond slave, and he worked his way to be free. And I found that really resonated with me.
Yeah. And that, let me just say that Nick Nolte did an excellent job with the voice work. And I didn't recognize him right off the bat either. But when I found out who he was, it was like, oh, yeah. And so, unfortunately, his personal life has kind of gives you a certain image of him. So when I put the voice with the character and how he was very a man of few words, the character he voices in this series, and the gruff exterior, I was like, well, that absolutely fits what we know of as far as Nick Nolte is concerned. And I think he did an excellent job in this. And I think that this definitely showcases the talent that the Jon Favreau and the others who are in charge of this show have put into this series. I think that is very much worth mentioning, a little nerd sidebar here, that this particular episode and other episodes was directed by Rick Famuyiwa. And Rick Famuyiwa is a Nigerian American director. Now, okay, so movies that don't necessarily reach the mainstream, as it were. A lot of his movies that he's known for are movies that I own because, you know, they're centered around Black people. And The Wood is one, is like a coming of age film back in 1999, starred Omar Epps, Taye Diggs, Richard T. Jones. You know, that was my life. You with your homies, and you grow up and you become young men, and you live your life and you have your experiences. Brown Sugar is another one, 2002, which starred Taye Diggs and Sanaa Lathan, who has a lot of nerd cred in some of the movies that she's been in, like Alien versus Predator, for one. And Talk to Me, which was a Don Cheadle, Taraji P. Henson, Cedric the Entertainer film that was directed by Cassie Lemons. It was a biographical film. And Dope, which was another coming of age film back in 2015. Famuyiwa, for I guess some note to you, RJ, has also directed various episodes of The Flash, the CW show, yes. And so he's tied to that as well. So yeah, just worth mentioning with regards to this this show and this particular episode, that it was directed by him. So we will move on to chapter 3, The Sin. And this particular episode deals with Jaren delivering the child to the client. Now, something he normally doesn't do with regards to his missions and his bounties that he goes on is ask a lot of questions. Pretty much, you hired me to do this, I do this, I give you what it is that I'm supposed to retrieve for you, and you get me paid, and that's it. But because of the connection that has developed between the child and Jaren over the past 2 chapters, we are going to see Jaren ask the client what his plans are for the child. And he is given no answer. It's like, you don't need to know this. No, you've done what you need to do. Here's your Beskar, beat it. And when Jaren returns to the secret Mandalorian enclave. So let's just go back a little bit to fill in some people who may not be familiar with what's going on. The Mandalorians were a race, were initially a race of warriors from the planet Mandalore. And they sometimes would take people into their order based upon circumstances. For instance, they would be called foundlings. So if they came across someone, maybe a child, in Jaren's case, this is the case, they came across him as a child when his people were being killed, and they gave him an option to join their order. So he is not from Mandalore, he's from another planet, but he is a part of their order. So he becomes a Mandalorian in that regard. Anyway, the Empire had been trying to wipe the Mandalorians out because they had felt that they were a threat, and they wanted to keep them divided. Now, this will be something that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in season 2, which is really cool. But nonetheless, he goes to the armorer, and the armorer is there to build the armor for the Mandalorians, because, you know, his armor was damaged in the last chapter. And so he's got the Beskar, and he's given it to the armorer to repair his armor and to add on to his armor. And he, another Mandalorian berates him for working with former agents of the Empire, because the client has affiliations with the Empire because he's got stormtroopers as his bodyguards. And Jaren learns that Greef Karga, the leader of the guild, the Bounty Hunter Guild, basically Jaren decides that he is not going to hand over this child because he doesn't like what they're planning on doing. But Karga says, look, you made a deal. You got to stick with it. This is our code. This is what we do. If you don't do it, then we're going to have to come after you. And that's pretty much what happens. So he goes back to the lab. Jaren does. He kills the stormtroopers, and he takes the child, and he's on the run. This episode is another turning point, but this is a one where you've reached the point of no return here. And this is what really is like where the shit hits the fan, the fannies are in the fire, and there's no turning back. And this was a very exciting episode for me because it gave you a little bit more, another layer of Jaren. And as I had mentioned before, when it comes to him, the actor, Pedro Pascal, showing character and emoting when you don't see his face, this is another instance where the cinematography and the pacing of the show, of the chapter, and his body language, it speaks volumes, and he doesn't even have to say anything, and you don't see his emotions in his face, and it's just awesome. Okay, before I ask you guys what you thought of this episode or this chapter, let me just say that as I was watching this first season, every time an episode ended, I felt like someone punched me in the gut. I had to wait another week for the next episode, and you don't know, I was like, I've got to hurry up and get through this week because Friday I got to get to Friday because I got to see what happens. I still feel this way even in season 2. That's how much I am enjoying this show. what do you guys think about this episode?
I'm gonna let Ericka go next on this one, and probably the next one also.
Okay, well, there was a lot to unpack in that episode because it is a watershed for his character development, and it's really the inciting incident that sends us through into what the entire rest of the series is going to be about. And again, I loved that they were able to focus on just that story and not bring in a whole bunch of extraneous other subplots to sort of distract us from what's essentially a heist show. This is the big heist. And if you're talking in the parlance of the Western, he just robbed the bank and now he's trying to get away. What I really loved about this episode was the exploration of the Mandalorian community that he's a part of, and the way that they come together for him, even though they know what it means to release themselves out to the public and to make themselves visible. Because one of the things they sort of allude to is the whole siege of Mandalore and the scattering of their people. And so they risk a lot for what is essentially Din Djarin's whim. And I thought that was a very profound statement to make, especially in this day and age when we're all very divided.
Most definitely. And the idea that basically this piqued my interest. I just wanted to say this real quick before RJ shares his thoughts. This episode piqued my interest and got me to thinking, okay, I want to learn more about Mandalore and the Mandalorians. So I started to read some of the novels. Now, not all of them are canon, but they do give you some insight into certain things. And I started researching the comics that went along with this, and you learn so much more. But this show is giving you a glimpse into stuff that you always kind of wondered about, but were never shown and was never explored. I remember when I was a kid, during the time that the original trilogy came out, everyone would go to school and we would be talking about Boba Fett and how badass he was and how he was awesome and, that armor and all of that. But we never really knew much about him or his people. And now we're getting that glimpse, and it's like, I've waited, 30 years or, more here now to be able to see and learn more about the characters and where they come from. And it's just, I'm hooked. What do you think, RJ?
It's more like 40. But anyway.
Yeah. Well.
So yeah, couple important points that struck me with this episode. He brought his bounty in. He turned Baby Yoda over. He took the payment, which I thought, was really important. And I love the fact that another important point is that they showed that his reputation bringing this bounty in, because they bring up this fact that apparently this little guy has been really hard to catch. I guess there were multiple bounties out at the same time. Most of them, I guess not a one had come back yet, and yet apparently a lot of folks had died trying to bring Baby Yoda in, and then he's the one that does it, and everyone's treating him like he's the big hero. So I mean, by the time he decides to basically renege on his deal, I mean, he has a lot to lose at that point. I don't have the notes in front of me. Carl Weathers' character basically says, "You can have the pick of any bounty you want now. I will. You're the guy. You're my man, and I'm gonna allow you to name your price, name your quarry." And I mean, you get the idea. He walked away from a lot, and yeah, that was kind of funny. He let them finish the armor for him first. He took the payment and he got the armor, and then he went back and got Baby Yoda, which was kind of like, well, at least you got that out of the deal before things turned on you. But now that he's crossed the line, like Ericka said, there's no going back. You really feel the weight of what he's betrayed and what this community meant to him before he turned on it. And yet the Mandalorians did help him with his escape, but there's going to be incredible consequences from this chapter. And it's basically this is a 3-part setup, and this kind of finishes the setup. So
it's also the first of many times that the Carl Weathers character tries to convince him to take a vacation.
Right, exactly. So yeah, those are my thoughts so far, John.
All right. Well, I just want to make one other note about this episode. It was directed by Deborah Chow. She is a Canadian filmmaker and television director and screenwriter. Just interesting side note about her. She has directed various projects for television, including Flowers in the Attic, which is a 2014 Lifetime movie. It was an adaptation of V.C. Andrews' 1979 novel, the same name. We've got Copper, which is a BBC America show set during the 1860s in New York City during Civil War. We've got Murdoch Mysteries, which is a popular Canadian television drama. We've got Rain, which is an American historical romance show, very popular on the CW. We've got Beauty and the Beast, which didn't do all that well. It was very loosely inspired by the original 1987 show, which really did very well. And Mr. Robot, which I thought was an interesting thing, which is an American drama thriller television series on the USA Network. So the directors, why I am mentioning the directors is because you're going to have some names that are going to become very familiar with you with regards to these episodes.
This concludes part 1 of a 3-part series on The Mandalorian Season 1. Join us next week for part 2. Thanks.
Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.